Welcome to S&B Podcast, where we provide our reviews on the economy, capital markets, geopolitics, and emerging technologies. I'm your host, Sam Bale, the founder of Future Capital Partners, or FCP, with my good friend and your co-host, John Sinclair. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Sam. Hello, everyone. I'm John Sinclair. I'm a corporate strategy specialist, special focus around turnaround and growth. I have designed and executed some complex strategies and transformation programs for Fortune 500 companies, as well as late-stage startups with quantifiable business outcome and some setbacks. And we hope to share those with you.
Thank you, John. Strategy is one of my favorite topics. Precisely speaking, I mean corporate strategy. Despite all the content and knowledge out there, I have seen a lot of strategies fail. And today we're going to find out why and what to do about it. So before we deep dive into the why and what to do about it, tell us, John, what is a strategy?
So, strategy is a sequence of framework and activities that are designed to help grow, compete, and transform organizations, right? That's a simplistic term.
Strategy has a great history. So can you give us a little bit of historical background, the foundation of strategy, how it come to corporate world?
Yeah. So it's interesting. So strategy actually, its origin is from battlefield. It's usually from the military application. As far as you can go back, 400 BC, it has been well articulated in the book called Art of War by Sun Tzu. And this was basically, it was designed to how to outsmart your military opponent and win wars. That was the whole reason why the strategy was born. Fast forward 330 AD, Byzantine Empire, the Greek, um, they were using at the same time, exact same reason to win wars, to outsmart their opponents and their enemies, right? And the way the Greek word that came is called strategmata, right? Or tricks of war. Or let me just make sure I don't butcher the pronunciation. My good friend. So quickly, so I reached out to my former chief of staff, one of the and my protege, one of the most brilliant strategies in his own right, Nick Teodoro from Montreal. Um, so just make sure that I don't butcher the Greek pronunciation. So he helped me with this. So another word of strategy from the Greek origin is a strategon sophia or sophia strategon. What that means is general's wisdom, right? So as you can see, it clearly has a military origin, right? And the objective has been to win wars. Now, fast forward, it got adopted in modern business and management practice. I believe that initially the early work that was done was in 1965. I want to make sure I don't butcher the name by Harry Igor Ansoff, right? So he's also known as the father of strategic business consulting, right? He's the guy who came up with the initial the strategy and business application. He was a Russian American mathematician. And then the 80s, the work was further refined by a professor from Harvard Business School, Michael Porter. I'm sure you heard of him, the Five Forces, very well known, brilliant framework for developing strategies. Many, Fortune 500 companies have adapted, embraced, and built their strategy based on that framework. So McKinsey's 7S framework, um, equally effective, right? Many organizations have embraced, adapted, and executed their strategy based on that framework. So, as far as from the historical context, coming from its military application to our modern business world, how strategy is being leveraged, the truth is, it's designed exactly the same way it was originally adapted or envisioned to win, right? Whether you're winning a war or you're winning in business, winning new customer, winning new revenue, winning new market share, right? So end goal is winning.
So let me applaud you for your providing this historical content on the strategy, despite its rich origin, and it seems like it's a backbone of every business. And now we want to, provide the meat of this podcast, which is why do strategies fail despite being like there's a lot of content and knowledge out there?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. It's a very good question. So first of all, thank you for coming up with this topic, right? Because this is an interesting topic, and I think it's top of mind not only for all your peer group, right? But I think even what I do on a day to day basis, with my customers and my peers, this is definitely a huge gap. Everybody recognize everyone has a strategy, but not all is effective, right?
Before start on that, I also want to give you credit. I came up with the topic, but I think you are providing the content, and you did a lot of preparations on that.
For,
So
for
thank you.
Yeah, I take credit for the title for sure, right?
Yeah,
So the title today is Rethink Corporate Strategy, right? And I purposely chose the name Demystifying the Elusive Treasure Map, right? So why did I say that? Demystifying Elusive Treasure Map. Because when I look at the corporate strategy in modern time in the last 5 to 7 years, it reminds me of Nicolas Cage movie National Treasure.
great
Do you
movie.
remember that?
Yeah.
Nicolas Cage steals the Declaration of Independence, and then he's on the run. FBI is chasing him. He shows up to his father's house, and his father looks at him and says, "What are you doing? This is a complete dream because you're just going to go, this map is going to lead you to the next location of another map, and that's going to lead you to another location to another map." So right, so that's what I kind of thought about that. It kind of resembles the movie, the modern the corporate strategy, because like you said, very few are successful these days. It's elusive, right? Because everybody thinks they have a plan, they have a blueprint, but somehow it's not achieving the end state objective.
Yeah, so that's why we want to find out what are the causes of failure, if you can categorize it for us. I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
So the five things I could think of. I'm sure there is many other reasons, but I think these are the five primary the points of failure that really jumps out, right? The first and foremost is lack of differentiation in strategy. So when strategy originally, the way this was, if you look at the 80s and 90s, um, these were very bespoke. This was designed for very unique to your business, right? To your specific customer, to your market, right? So those strategies were highly tailored and designed to win. And that's why you saw much higher success in the 80s and 90s. And if you look at it today, given the fact strategy consulting is such a big business, a multi-billion-dollar industry, in the past, when you talked about strategy consulting, you thought about two or three companies, BCG, McKinsey, and Bain, right? Maybe one or two more. But today, you just do a Google search, you'll find hundreds of strategy consulting firms, right? And these are not just, they're just not doing only strategy consulting, they're doing other traditional consulting services. The reason why this is so popular, because they recognize if you do strategy consulting, you're getting access to C-suite, the decision makers. That gives you a front row seat to everything that's about to come into this organization, every single upselling opportunities, right? So I could understand why this is so attractive to all the consulting firms, but it also comes with its own risk. When something has been templatized and commoditized at this degree, it's very difficult to maintain uniqueness. So because it's so competitive now, people that have customers have option to go to 50 different companies to get a strategy consultant or a team of strategy consultant. So it's a very competitive, and so they're competing in price, right? And when you do that, when you are competing in price, what's happening? You have to make sure that you're still profitable, but you have to not lower your prices, right? The challenge with that is, this is one of the things I compare strategy consulting with plastic surgery. I'm a firm believer that you don't ever look for a discount or Groupon coupon for plastic surgery, especially when it comes to your face. Because one mistake, it's forever. You're gonna have to live with this, right? And I feel like strategy is one of those things that if you are looking for discount shops to do your strategy, you're not getting a bespoke strategy that is designed for you to win. You're getting a beautifully crafted, a lot of buzzwords, industry buzzwords in there with some PowerPoint presentation or a keynote presentation. It sounds good, sounds compelling, but not sure it's equally as effective, right? Because now it just has been diluted. It's to the point that it's very difficult to find strategy that just jumps out, right? And I could give you an example. So I listen to a lot of the analyst call for different my customers, And I'm surprised to see that in a like industry, so many of the corporate strategy sounds exactly the same. There's almost it's almost impossible to determine what the differentiation between these competitors in the same industry space. It's a different conversation in a product space because when you're a product seller, industrial manufacturing, you have some trade secrets, you have some differentiation. It's much different, right? But then you also have to look at it just like everything else, right? In the industry, in the last decade, industries have been disrupted, right, by fintech and by all these startups, right? Just like that, the practice of strategy have been disrupted by startups, successful startups. And they absolutely demonstrated with financial success that these two, three, four, five friends starting, a startup in Silicon Valley or New York, and they are taking down some of the most largest, most successful industries, right? Because what they're bringing forth something new, they're solving a problem, an industry gap, whatever, right? Whatever it may be, and they have done that without the benefit of having a multi-million dollar strategy consulting firms, right? So what they have done is they went back to the basic. They focused on market, the competitive landscape, and what is the what's the barrier of entry, and thinking about what is a specific gap that they can fulfill with this differentiated offering, right? Very simple yet holistic approach to strategy, right? Without the benefit of going through the whole assessment and then leveraging all these fancy, Michael Porter's or McKinsey's 7S framework, right? Or there's many more, right? But the point of the matter is, what I'm trying to say is this: the strategy as a practice have been disrupted, right? Among many other things that I talked about. Now, think about developing a strategy is just like, how do I say? It's 1/10 of the actual work. What really matters is how you execute on that strategy, because that's what delivers the end state objective, right? So the first thing we talked about is lack of differentiation. So let's talk about the next thing, lack of accountability. In the last decade, if you see, if it's so many different practices, the delivery methodology with agile, and many other things that has been introduced in transformation programs, it took away the accountability, including the org design that is being proposed or have been proposed by some of the big four consulting firms, right? So, for example, if you have an organization and you have a strategy that is coming down, top down CEO, right? See, to the rest of the organization. The next thing you're going to see, there's 15 other strategy that counters that or contradicts that strategy. And I'm not saying it's in every company, but good number of them. So you're going to see a CEO strategy has a very clear vision, a very clear end state objective. Then you're going to see you're going to have sub strategies coming from marketing. They have their own strategy. They may have some alignment with the CEO's mission and vision, but completely misguided when it comes to which direction they're going to the end state objective. You're going to see a strategy from HR, well intentioned, and yet completely disjointed from CEO's mission and vision and growth strategy, right? This may actually inadvertently actually undermine the strategy. Then you're going to have strategy from other groups like IT. IT may have their strategy. And I have always argued in the last decade or more, there is no such thing as IT strategy. It's always a business strategy. What is IT strategy?
That's what I was going to ask. Like, there be a distinction between like a corporate strategy and each department is a play a tactical role rather than having their own strategy? Because
correct.
there's a strategy can be only one, right?
Yeah.
Not every department like HR or IT have their own strategy. So shouldn't be a tactic to implement the strategic view of the leadership or of the company?
Yeah. It's a good point, right? So I think there is a real need to have, a different strategy because you're basically tackling a very different components of an organization, right? So, for example, marketing is going to do what? They're going to be an enabling organization, the mission and vision of the grand strategy of the CEO, right? But you could have a different approach to it, but your outcome has to be crystal clear to what the corporate strategy's objective is. That cannot be deviate from that. It cannot be ambiguous. It has to be crystal clear. And there has to be clear accountability. So what I'm trying to say is this: When a corporate strategy fails, sadly, who gets fired? It's the vendor who's delivering this and some lower level, mid level management folks that they're going to get fired, right? For me, an accountability is when every dependent organization and the leadership all the way down, it has end to end accountability, right? So you cannot run a corporate strategy and expect that to execute flawlessly when you have all these supporting organization running their own strategy but has absolutely no accountability to the failure or success of this strategy. So quick example that comes to mind: HR procurement could literally stop you at the middle of an execution and bury you with legacy processes, slow you down 6 months, a year, and there goes your strategy. But guess what? They have been empowered to basically make a decision on your business strategy and as in flight as you're executing the strategy. They have zero accountability to the outcome, right? So that's a huge problem. The third thing: intentional or inadvertent sabotage of organization. Inadvertent sabotage basically means legacy organization that are so process heavy, and every aspect of the organization has multi-layer governance structure. The truth of the matter is, if you have that many governance, you basically, this is the breeding ground for a bureaucracy. And if that happens, it doesn't matter what approval you have received from your C-suite, they will stop you every step of the way. So the culture is very much like checkers checking the checkers. This does not serve the best interest of the business. It does not serve the best interest of the stakeholders or shareholders, right? So this is a serious, serious problem, right? So that I meant by inadvertent sabotage, because it's the corporate culture that is so legacy and so outdated. And you, of course, you're going to see some intentional sabotage. If anybody said that doesn't happen, that's completely untrue. It happens a lot, as a matter of fact, right? It could be because you're not aligned with your leadership vision and mission, right?
I
It,
think you said something. The power of unwillingness is along the same line,
the
right?
power of the unwilling, right?
Yeah.
So actually, yeah, so I actually felt that, and I've experienced in the last 3 decades. I've seen that, nearly 3 decades, right? I've seen that, during my consulting years, when I was working as a management consultant, as well as when I was working for different companies, I've seen that firsthand, right? Somebody may not agree with you, or they may not be aligned to the same outcome. It could be also poor leadership that are completely threatened by change, because any new strategy as you're executing, what are you doing? You're basically embarking on an unknown, right? A new journey to drive a new outcome, right? To grow the company, change the company, right? There are a lot of legacy leaders that are simply, they may agree, with the strategy, but never underestimate the power of unwilling. They fall under that bucket, right? They will absolutely do everything they can to potentially sabotage to make sure it doesn't go anywhere, right? Because they are the architect of all the old ideas, the things that didn't work. They're too scared that if the strategy is successful, this may expose them for all the bad decisions they have made, right? But again, I want to be very clear, guys. There are a lot of companies out there. They have brilliant strategy, brilliant leadership team, excellent support organization. So these are non-issue. Today's topic, we're addressing why strategy fails. So this only apply to those organizations that have embarked on multi-year strategies or repeated strategies and haven't seen the stated end state objective, right? So this is what we're discussing today. The next thing is poor leadership, and I think this is something we actually had a whole topic about this at one of the podcasts, right, regarding the leadership issue. So anytime you're doing a corporate strategy, right? So before you execute, you have to make sure that, do you have the right leaders, right? Did you hire the right leaders? And are they the capable leader who will be able to execute your mission, vision, and strategy? So the reason why I put a lot of emphasis on leadership, because today, if you look at it in a most corporate culture, today, it's very much focused on performance, 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 right? I think in our last episode we kind of talked about that. There are so many KPIs, so death by KPI, and every there's so much emphasis on performance that there's almost no KPI to measure the integrity or the trustworthiness of your leaders or your employees. So what happens now? You may have a high performance leader, but he's not a trustworthy person. That's a toxic leader. Nothing is going to be executed. He's going to be stopped every step of the way, or he's going to basically undermine the people that works for him or work with him throughout the way. You're looking at a disaster in the making, right? And that happens a lot. And then same thing as you're hiring, your hiring practices. Again, the same thing comes down in organizational practices, legacy practices. If your focus is purely around just measuring performance, 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 you have annual appraisals, you have quarterly performance rating, you'll have 360 review, right? So you basically beating your employees to death basically by focusing on performance, but it's very much one-sided, one-sided exercise, right? Because the employees don't feel empowered. They feel like they're constantly under a magnifying glass, under these arbitrary rules that are being measured against that they have no ability to control the outcome, right? So I think that's what I mean. Like the leadership matters, right? This is extremely, extremely important. That if you don't have the right leader, if you don't have the trusted leader, right, you're not going to get the outcome. So I think the trend has to change. It has to be trustworthiness first, performance second, as opposed to in the last previous several decades, the focus has been purely around performance, right? So the companies have to come up with ways to the new ways of working, selecting, identifying, and retaining the best leaders that meets those criteria. Those two. You don't need 15 KPIs to measure a leader. You need two. Is he a person of high integrity, high trust, and is he a good performer, right? Not necessarily the highest performer, because everybody wants that. Of course, that'll be ideal, but it also depends, on the market you're recruiting and availability of that type of talents out there. But the primary objective, primary focus must be on integrity and trust, right? um Number five, the focus should be on our most valuable asset, right? And that's our people. I think over the last couple of decades, what has happened, organizations somehow, whether it's intentionally, whether it's inadvertently, whether it's the because the sign of time, they kind of lost sight of what makes a company successful. It's your people. And such aggressive nature of labor arbitrage. I understand the financial uh, the appeal why companies wants to do that, because it provides, at least on the surface level, that there's a tremendous cost savings opportunity. And I think we talked about it in the past. The truth is, it doesn't really provide any real savings. It's very anecdotal data. There is no scientific data that could demonstrate that labor arbitrage has any correlation with corporate growth, whether it's a top line revenue, bottom line revenue. There's no real data that could show that, right? All it does is basically it removes the spend from a capital expenditure bucket into OPEX bucket. So what's really happening is you're getting a huge discount up front, 20, 30% perceived savings. But because it's labor arbitrage now, you don't have any internal talent that are focused on innovation. So anytime you want to do any extra work, everything becomes a change order. So now what's happening is you're spending a far more money, doing work that could be considered out of scope in those contracts. But reality is you're spending far more money, getting a lot less in return, right? So, so I'm not advocating against outsourcing. I think there is a tremendous need for outsourcing for competitive edge, but it has to be balanced in a way that you don't undermine your own employees. It has to be balanced. It has to be strategic, and it has to be done in a way that one, you protect your IP. Second, you protect the integrity of your work culture, and number three, that you make sure that your employees feel safe and they're trusted. And it's really important, and of course empowered, because what is the point of hiring smart people if you don't empower them to do the job they were hired to do? What is the point of hiring smart people if you don't trust them that they're going to do the right thing, right? And we don't. I mean, if you look at it, the level of governance that are put in place, that most legacy cultures, it's like checkers checking the checkers. You got 16 people checking somebody else's work or stopping you. This is crazy, right?
Mhm.
Um, and the crazy part is that as we're discussing this, so I'm not saying anything that is so unique and that no one knows about this. The truth of the matter is everybody knows what I'm talking about. I've had many conversations with you and many of our industry peers, right? Everybody recognize it, but for whatever reason that people are just not comfortable talking about the obvious. These are real obvious challenges. So if you look at, so the to recap, we talked about five things, five key areas where what causes the failure for modern strategies, right? Lack of differentiation, lack of accountability, inadvertent or intentional sabotage, poor leadership, right? And finally, failure to appreciate the most valuable asset. That's our people. So those are the five. I'm sure there's more, like I said, but I think if you focus on those five areas, the rest will work out.
Thank you. So that's the problem with the modern strategies. So where the benefit or opportunity to reimagine strategy, and what is the risk or are the risks if you do nothing?
Yeah. So the opportunity is tremendous, right? And I think this is something that you touched upon on our very first podcast when we talked about transformation. Um, we're living in a very exciting time. I'm taking your line now. I'm stealing your line, right? And the reason why it's an exciting time because there's a lot of changes happening right in front of our eyes. The globalization that has been a trend, you could see it's being uh, disrupted for sure to some degree. A lot of countries are focused on nationalists. They've taken nationalist policies, protectionism. It's happening. It's happening in Asia. It's happening in some parts of Europe. It's happening in the United States as well to some degree, right? So that's one. Second is innovation. We're at an era of unimaginable innovations. Think about what's happening with 5G. 5G will change the industry, every single industry, whether it's aerospace, healthcare, life science, um, industrial manufacturing, smart, enabling smart cities, autonomous vehicle, right? 5G is going to take it to the next level. All the things that, including, not just a civil application, but also defense application, right? Warfare. And if you look at our size of our, military industrial complex, you could just imagine how much money is there to be made in this industry, right? Whether you're working in a private sector or public sector, right? So it creates a tremendous opportunity from your side as an investor side. There is serious money in there, right, for investments, right? So and can you imagine a better time to have a corporate strategy that allows you to focus on pursuit and capture of all these net new revenue that didn't exist before, all these innovation opportunities that are coming out that did not exist before, right? So I think that, so there is a significant opportunity, but it has to be, to be able to capture that, you also have to adapt new ways of working, new ways of developing your strategy, right? Take some of these advice that we know that we are pointing out, the things that causes failure, and take some necessary steps to make sure those doesn't happen, and prepare yourself the strategies of the future, right? The frameworks are great. I mean, I think I love all the frameworks, whether it's a Michael Porter, whether it's the McKinsey. There are so many uh, boutique, very specific IP from different consulting companies. They have their own customized strategy framework, strategy development framework. They're all good. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's just like building a house, right? If the foundation isn't right, it doesn't matter how beautiful the house you're building, it will collapse. It's just a matter of time. And I think the items that we talked about, those five items, consider them as your foundation, because if you don't fix that, no strategy can actually change anything.
No, thank you. And I just want to clarify one thing. We are specifically talking about corporate strategy from an alternative investment standpoint. The way I see it, when we invest in a hedge fund or fund of funds, you look at a strategy, and there's always a plan that if anything deviant away from the strategy, what is the mitigation plan, right? So it seems like a corporate strategy is a linear process rather than a multi variable process, right? So that being said, what is the solution? What is the best approach to a corporate strategy?
Yeah. So I think the first and foremost, I think there has to be a real recognition that something isn't working. You can't fix something unless you recognize it's not working. And I think a lot of the leaders out there, they're recognizing that strategy really isn't producing the end state objective. And the approach has to be simplistic, but holistic. If it is not simple enough, it'll be too difficult to communicate to your audience, to your customers. If it is not holistic, you're going to miss a lot of core dependencies that makes a strategy successful, right? And I think we talked about those five gaps, and those are the five gaps I would have to say, at least as a starting point, to really put a real focus, real investment to change those old ways of working, change those legacy mindset, right? Get the right leaders, have the right people, change some of the procurement practices, transform your HR organization to make sure um, that they're focused on growth. They're focused, they're exactly aligned with the CEO strategy. You cannot execute a strategy if your leadership and your supporting organization that are supposed to be enablers does not have any skin in the game, right? You cannot empower groups and organizations for the sake of governance if they have no accountability, right?
Yeah, makes
So
sense.
I guess you want me to give you a little bit more detail on specific steps on how to
Absolutely.
overcome that. Okay. So I think what we talked about is um, some of the five key areas, right? The first and foremost is basically lack of differentiation, right? For you to change that, I think your approach to working with strategy consulting firms, it has to be crystal clear. Your requirement has to be the strategy that you're selling me. It has to be unique. There has to be a market differentiation, not just a one point PowerPoint presentation research done by some fresh graduate from Brown or Columbia or Harvard, but it has to be tested. Like there has to be some data behind this, right? Real data. You need to have a better understanding of your competitive landscape. Again, like a real research, real actual investment, and not just some, reshuffling of PowerPoint that 20, 30, 50 of your competitors receive the identical briefing, right? Because that doesn't give you the flexibility to develop something unique, right? Um, so the market differentiation has to be crystal clear, and only way you'll achieve that by having a bespoke strategy for your business, right? You also have to change the procurement practice or the way you do business with these consulting firms. You have to make it very clear. I know that procurement plays the game by holding a carrot to get a better discount during a strategy engagement. Well, help us with this and you'll have a tremendous opportunity for, follow on business. Here's the problem. That's a horrible mistake, because what you did is you diluted your ability to achieve that unique bespoke strategy and product, right? Because now these guys are no longer focused on just building a strategy that's going to help you win. Now they're focused on after this strategy exercise is over, what's my next engagement in this company? I'm going to identify all these gaps, and I'm going to have the first right to provide a statement of work. So I'm going to grow my footprint. And you can't blame them for that, right?
Yeah.
Because these are company for profit. But the point of the matter is, as a practice, actually, I think one of my previous jobs, I remember the procurement was brilliant. So I was getting a briefing, and procurement gave me a quadrant, and they said, for all your strategy work, you only go to these four vendors. Or all your specialist work, you go to these four or five vendors. All your operational or BAU, business as usual, any type of improvement or support of the legacy, you go to these SIs. Any repeat work that you want to outsource, you go to these companies that are excellent for labor arbitrage, right? So we had a beautiful document, a one pager. We kind of knew. And the purpose of that was you don't dilute your own strategy, because then what you're doing is you're basically giving these vendors to focus on their strategy, in essence, their growth strategy more so than yours. And again, you cannot blame them. These are all company for profit, right? You have to be transparent, and you have to basically, communicate to your vendors saying, listen, love your company, love your product. Your core, what I appreciate is your strategy consulting. Any strategy type of work, you're the guy we're going to use. Anything else, don't bother. Don't waste your time giving me statement of work, selling me organizational redesign or procurement transformation or supply chain. I don't need that. For that, I'm going to work with specialist companies, right? But if I need something in addition to complement and augment my strategy, you're my go-to guy, right? By being transparent, you're allowing them to focus on building you a bespoke strategy that's designed to win. Remember, the original meaning of strategy from the warfare standpoint, what is to win? And I think that's the mindset we have to get back to, right? The second piece is accountability and alignment, right? To make sure you are restructuring your organization and staffing it with the right kind of leaders. And on our very first episode, we specifically talked about how to select the right leaders, right? And that itself also you could leverage the help of third-party consulting firms that are specializes in vetting leaders, right? And avoid those that comes in with 100 checklists, 100 question checklist, focused on performance. If the companies are not focused, they don't have a methodology in which they can assess someone's trustworthiness and someone's integrity, then those are not the companies you want to leverage. But it's important that when you're building a corporate strategy, execution matters, and it's highly dependent upon the quality of people that will execute. Starts from leaders. So that's that. Um, so you have to, and of course, as you do your corporate restructuring or your corporate redesign, organizational redesign, to make sure all these support organizations, they're fully aligned to the corporate strategy. You make sure you remove all bureaucracy, right? And the way you do that, collapse every organization that are purely focused on governance. Because governance, healthy governance is good, but the governance should be identical to the way the sales governance works, right? Because we do today um, quarterly business review, right? So who are you giving the status report to? To senior leaders. You're explaining to them how well the sales strategy is working. Where are we on our quota attainment, our goals and objective for this quarter? What do we think we can realistically bring, close business that we can close? And how is the next 2, 3, or 4 quarter looking, projections, right? Things like that. So I think that similar approach has to be adapted across the board to all support organizations. You cannot have multi-tier organizational inspection in the shape of governance, because it slows down innovation. It slows down the speed in which you're going to execute your strategy, and it demoralizes your people. Right? There's no real value in it. Right? It might be, provide some job security for some legacy workforce, but if the goal is to really transform your organization and go and win collectively, you have to make sure get the team on board. They all have to be aligned. They all have to be aligned to the goals and objective of the strategy, right? And if they're not, they will constantly provide roadblocks. So you have to collapse all legacy organizations that are designed to purely for governance. Secondly, you have to empower your leaders. If you're hiring smart people, you have to trust that you hired the right people to do the right job, right? And if you don't empower them to the job you have hired them to do, and you're going to question them every step of the way with the 15, 20, 30 different folks that has nothing to do, has zero accountability on the outcome, and they're going to be inspecting your work and stopping every step of the way. Kind of reminds me of, I'm going to use an analogy. Imagine in your household, and your wife takes care of the whole house. She's in charge. She's accountable for everything that happens in the house because you're leaving, going to work, right? In most cases, right? Or it could be you're the person staying home and your wife is the bread earner. In that case, you're accountable for everything that happens in the house, including the well-being of the children, making sure the utilities are paid and all that. How would it work if your spouse Every time you have to go spend the money to pay the rent or pay the utility, has to go get permission from your siblings or your cousins or your mom. How is that going to work? You're not trusting the person that is your partner. You're not empowering that person to make decision, and you're not trusting them to do the right thing. Same thing applies in companies. If you don't trust your employees, they're going to be hesitant to make decision. They're going to be too fearful of making decisions. So you have to change that mindset. Hire the right people, give them the right accountability, and have the governance bottom up, not top down. You cannot be accountable to people that has zero accountability to the end state objective, right? So that's that. So the number three is leadership, right? I think we kind of touched upon that, right? Get the right leaders, right? You do not want to have leaders that are, known for high performance, but they don't have that trust factor. These are toxic leaders. These are toxic coworkers. They will absolutely destroy the morale of the workforce, and the success is questionable. I mean, I've seen that many, many times. Number four, I think we talked about either inadvertent or intentional sabotage, right? You really have to look for areas that do not serve your strategic end state objective, right? If you have organizations just purely in the shape of just order takers and have no accountability, maybe time to rethink and how to align them um, to like the sales organization, have them the same goals and objectives. So that way now, once they have the same accountability, you're going to see a very different behavior, right? Because now they're accountable. They can't just simply just throw, the practice the way it should be in every corporation. Like I say to all my leadership calls to my team member, I have this policy. I always tell them, guys, I welcome any questions, any comments, any ideas you have. There's no such thing as a bad idea. Go ahead, throw your ideas. Something you don't like, something you want to criticize, I welcome criticism. With the one caveat, you can identify what you don't like. Then I'm going to look at you and I'm going to say, thank you for bringing this to my attention. If you had my job, how would you fix it? How do you recommend we fix it? Make sure you're contributing to some idea of solving the problem. What we don't want to have a corporate culture where people throw rocks and has no accountability and they just run away. And you're like, okay, you just gave me all these feedback, but you're not giving me anything how to solve it, right? I'm not asking you to solve it, but I want to make sure that you have a vested interest. You're not somebody who's just poking at problem, but you're also looking at how collectively we can solve this. You want to create that type of a culture of collaboration. Um, the next is eliminate any KPIs. I think we kind of talked about that, right? All these nonsense KPIs, annual performance. Some of the best companies, successful companies, they got rid of annual performance, because so your performance are pretty much, you know, uh, visible in the performance of the company, right? And if you have to constantly, assessing people's performance every quarter, every year, I think there's a problem there. It means you don't trust them, and you're setting all these arbitrary, KPIs, and none of them is measuring the trustworthiness of these individuals, right? It's a very superficial. It makes no sense. I could understand why. Maybe the legacy mindset is like, if you find something and I put you in some box and saying you're not a top performer, you're a medium performer, you meet the objective, or you missed your mark, right? So maybe that probably reduces the number of people you're going to have to give promotions or salary raise. I understand why, right? But my point is, what it doesn't do, it does not drive productivity, trust, and confidence in that company. So get rid of all these legacy processes, right? It doesn't work. Change the operational mindset, right? As you lead your team, as you operationalize a strategy, as you try to execute, it will only work with empowerment, right? You have to hire people that you're empowering. They have clear decision rights. They know exactly what they can make decision, and then you have to trust they're going to do the right thing. Um, what you don't want to see, that continue operating in a command and control structure. That one of the problem with command and control structure, it's because people are constantly living in fear. You can't make decisions. You don't have right to make decisions, right? You're not allowed to. You have to go to 6 different layers of bureaucracy management for them to approve something. when something simple could have been done long ago, right? And everything has to be done through multi-layer of escalation. Get rid of that practice. Those things doesn't work. The only thing it serves is a handful of individuals that are extremely insecure and they want to hold on to their job. Maybe that works for them, but it does not work for the corporation. It does not work for the people they serve. Um, Number five, finally, make sure you empower, you reward, and you appreciate and you acknowledge our best, most valuable assets. It's our people. People have to feel safe. People have to feel like this is not a job, it's a career. They have to look at it like they're part of something. There's a reason why we're in the midst of um, crisis of our lifetime, the labor shortage. And I think I talked about it last time, and I said I don't believe that. I don't believe we have a labor shortage. There are companies that knows it very well, and they're able to find the right kind of talents and doing very well. What you're seeing is it's a lack of participation. They just don't want to work for you. If you're having trouble finding, if you have a high attrition, the telltale sign, they just don't want to work for your company. So it's time for some introspection and looking at it and saying, what have we done wrong? What can we change in our corporate culture to make it attractive? Why do you think there's so many people will go take a job for lesser money to work for a startup than to go work for a corporation? You know why?
No.
Because in a startup, you feel like you're part of something. You're contributing every single day when you go home. You feel like the line of codes you have created or the components of a product that you've created, you're part of that. It's celebrated. There's complete transparency. Everybody knows. So that everybody feels like you're winning together. I understand this is not possible in a massive multinational organization, but it doesn't have to be so toxic or so complicated that people feel like they're not contributing. People don't feel valued. And that's why we're facing this a once in a lifetime crisis of labor shortage, right? So I think that has to change, right? That mindset has to change. You have to create a place where people want to come and work. You have to create a work environment that people actually trust. You have to hire leaders that are trusted, and the employees knows that they're valued, and serving those leaders, they know their career will be on the right track. Um, and that's it. I think we talked about these 5 points, right? I kind of went in detail about each one of these five. I'm sure there could be many more, but my point was these are the five components of failure that really jumps out, right? These are so obvious to everybody, right? And I think there has to be a conscious decision as you're building a new corporate strategy. When I talked about simple yet holistic strategy, you can't have a holistic strategy if you don't look into your organizational gap, address those, and now you have a pretty good shot of winning at that strategy.
I think this is a great framework for private equity firms to assess their investment strategy to when they are acquiring target companies, and this is a great framework for leadership to to use this framework to define their competitive advantages or whatever their objective is. And then also great strategy or framework for board, right? To assess their leadership if they are on the right track to take the company to next level. So thank you. I think this is a great conversation. So any closing thoughts?
Well, my closing thought is this. I think we kind of touched upon the gaps and how to solve them, right? But I think corporate strategy will always remain, in a way, it's like you're either going to have a differentiation focus or you're going to have a cost focus. So you're going to fall in one or the other, or you could be the combination of both. It will always be that. It's not all that complicated. What makes it complicated is when you're not paying attention to the hard dependencies that enables the strategy, right? And I think I just want to wrap up by saying again that the three things. One, we're absolutely not suggesting that any of the frameworks are outdated. I think it's the market the practice itself has been disrupted. Just the nature of the business, nature of time, the geopolitical events, the emergence of hundreds of consulting companies offering the same services. It's been diluted. It's that simple, right? Um, Number two, I think the focus has shifted from having bespoke to a cookie cutter. Doesn't work. Then you have no differentiation, right? Um, and I think that, and of course, the most important piece is these companies really have to wake up and realize that how do we solve this biggest crisis we are dealing with, the labor shortage, or fix the lack of labor participation? Because if you don't do that, what good is a strategy if you don't have good people to come and do it for you? Right.
So thanks, John, for this informative session. So I want to say thank you to our viewers and listeners for sharing their time with us, and look forward to spending more time in the upcoming sessions. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.